Kansas, May 1945. The wind moved like a whip across the open plains, carrying the smell of dust and diesel. A convoy of green buses rolled through the barbed gates of Camp Concordia. Inside, rows of faces stared out, German women in faded uniforms, the last relics of a collapsing Reich. Nurses, radio operators, clerks who had followed orders until the orders vanished. Now, silence, only the hiss of air brakes and the low murmur of American MP saying, "Unload here." They expected punishment, hard labor, maybe worse. Instead, the first thing they noticed was the smell, coffee, and baked bread wafting from the mess hall. One woman, Ilse Brandt, 24, gripped her small satchel so tightly her knuckles whitened. She'd heard rumors from the Atlantic crossing that Americans treated prisoners too well. None of them believed it. The enemy didn't feed you before judging you. The camp itself looked impossible. Wooden barracks lined in neat order, laundry flapping in the sun, a basketball hoop. Even the guards' expressions lacked the hatred she braced for. When an American sergeant, barely older than she was, motioned toward the food hall and said, "Ladies first," she froze. It wasn't mockery, it was protocol. Numbers reveal the scale of this quiet theater. Over 500 German POW were brought to U.S. soil. Fewer than 2% were women, a forgotten minority of an already lost army. They arrived expecting hunger and interrogation, not fairness defined by Geneva Articles. Yet here rules were rules, the same ones that applied to captured men, and, astonishingly, to U.S. soldiers themselves. Ilse stepped into the mess hall. Long wooden tables stretched under the dim bulbs. Steam rose from metal trays. Potatoes, eggs, warm bread. The women hesitated, waiting for a command that never came. A guard simply nodded. "Eat." She bit into the first piece of white bread she'd seen since 1943. Her throat tightened, not from taste, but disbelief. Could this really be captivity? A strange kind of silence settled. No boots, no shouting, no slogans. Only chewing and the whisper of ration cards being stamped. When the meal ended, an officer clapped once and pointed toward a signboard, "Camp Rules." And among them, one line made every woman blink twice. Library access permitted daily. Tomorrow they'd learn what that meant. The mess hall buzzed like a beehive trapped in disbelief. Tin trays clanked, chairs scraped, but no one spoke above a whisper. The air smelled of butter, coffee, and boiled potatoes, luxuries no German civilian had seen in years. Ilse sat rigid, spoon in hand, watching an American sergeant move between tables. His tone wasn't cruel or mocking. It was procedural, calm, unsettlingly so. He began reading from a clipboard. Rules are simple, no shouting, no escape attempts. You work, you rest, you read. You'll be treated according to the Geneva Convention. The words rolled off his tongue like routine, but to the women they sounded like fiction. The Geneva Convention. That was something their own army quoted, but never practiced. Ilse looked at the food again. Scrambled eggs glistened under the dim bulbs. A square of white bread sat beside a slice of peach, real fruit. The first she'd seen since her brother mailed rations from the Eastern Front. Someone at her table murmured, "They eat like kings." Another replied softly, "We eat like them now. U.S. Camp policy dictated 200 calories a day for every POW, the same as an American G.I. Rations included coffee, meat, butter, and sugar, all tracked with military precision. To the prisoners, it felt like science fiction. In Germany, civilians were surviving on barely 1,000 calories and black market scraps. The contrast hit harder than propaganda ever could. "Enjoy the food," the sergeant said before walking out. Nobody moved for a moment. Then forks began scraping. Within minutes, tension melted into hunger. Some laughed nervous, startled laughs that felt like betrayal. Others wept quietly. Ilse ate in silence, each bite heavier with shame and gratitude. At the far end of the hall, a guard changed the notice board. Library open daily 08 Eros 1600. The room murmured again. Library, books were forbidden luxuries back home. Burned, banned, redacted. What kind of camp gave access to stories? As trays were stacked and the mess line cleared, Ilse caught her reflection in a window, pale face, crumb on her lip, eyes wide with confusion. Captivity had a flavor she didn't understand yet. Outside, the sun dipped behind the barracks, throwing long shadows across the campyard. The air was still warm, but something electric hung in it, curiosity. Tomorrow, she'd step into that library and discover that even words could be free. Morning sunlight cut through the barrack windows in thin, dusty beams. The camp was quiet except for the squeak of boots on gravel and the clang of a distant gate. Ilse followed a line of women toward a small wooden building marked library. She expected propaganda, pamphlets, or censored news, but when the door opened, a rush of warm paper scent hit her like nostalgia. Inside, hundreds of books filled the shelves. Goethe sat beside Hemingway, Tolstoy beside Steinbeck. The absurdity of it made her blink twice. A handwritten sign read, "Borrow freely, English and German sections separate. Return in 7 days." There was no officer watching, no ink stamp of censorship on the pages. Just stories waiting to be touched. Ilse picked up a worn copy of All Quiet on the Western Front. Her heart clenched. That book had been banned in Germany for years, condemned as unpatriotic. Here, in enemy territory, it stood proudly on display. She ran her fingers over the embossed title, half expecting someone to shout. No one did. A young American corporal stood by the counter, sorting returns. He looked up, smiled awkwardly. "We figured you'd like reading in your own language," he said. Ilse didn't answer, only nodded. The freedom felt heavier than the change she expected. Statistics later showed that over 1 million books circulated through POW libraries across the United States. For many prisoners, it was their first real education. Some learned English. Others rediscovered the literature their own regime had buried. The camp became a quiet experiment in what ideas could do when barbed wire couldn't stop them. At one table, a former Luftwaffe clerk muttered, "In our camps, even hymns were dangerous." Another replied, "Here they hand you Shakespeare." The women laughed softly, not from joy, but disbelief. The sound carried down the aisle, mingling with the rustle of turning pages. Ilse sank into a wooden chair, book open, hands trembling slightly. Outside, a gramophone played faintly, some American melody she didn't know. She tried to read, but her eyes kept drifting to the window, where sunlight shimmered on the fence. Even beauty here felt like contradiction. That night, as lights dimmed and curfew fell, Ilse lay awake replaying the words she'd read. "We are not youth any longer." And just beyond the barracks wall, she heard something new. Laughter and music, drifting from the recreation hall. Tomorrow, she'd see what freedom sounded like. That night, the camp pulsed with a rhythm no one expected. The recreation hall lights burned bright against the Kansas dark, casting long shadows through the wire fence. Inside, a group of American guards fussed over a radio, twisting the dial until a crackling trumpet line cut through static Glenn Miller's In the Mood. Ilse froze outside the doorway. Music, real music, not the stiff marches or patriotic anthems of home, but something alive, swinging, untamed. The rhythm thumped against the wooden walls as a guard laughed, tapping his boot. Then, impossibly, a few German women stepped forward and began to dance. They moved awkwardly at first, unsure if this was a trap, a joke. But when the guard waved and said, "Go ahead, rules allow recreation," the hesitation broke. A nurse with her hair tied up spun in her worn shoes. Another clapped along. Ilse watched, torn between fear and fascination. The absurdity was complete. Prisoners of war swaying to American jazz under the stars and stripes. Reports from that era mention it clearly, weekly dances and film screenings held to maintain morale. It wasn't kindness for kindness' sake. It was policy written into Geneva compliance. Yet to the prisoners, it felt like stepping into another world. The same women who once copied orders for bombing raids now laughed at a bad saxophone solo. Ilse finally stepped inside. The floorboards creaked beneath her boots. The room smelled of sawdust, sweat, and cheap perfume someone had smuggled in. A corporal adjusted the radio, saying, "Next up, Duke Ellington." Applause erupted. A strange warmth spread through the hall. For a fleeting hour the war didn't exist. The fences melted into rhythm. One woman whispered to Ilse, "We are prisoners yet freer than we were back home." She didn't answer because she felt it too. When the music faded, everyone stood breathless. The guards switched off the radio and shouted, "Lights out." But the echo of jazz lingered long after silence returned. Outside, under the moonlight, Ilse lingered by the notice board again. A new sheet fluttered in the wind, work assignments posted tomorrow. Freedom had come in music tonight. Tomorrow, it would come through labor. The next morning, the Kansas sun blazed sharp and white over the camp yard. Dust clung to every boot, every cuff, every breath. Ilse stood before the notice board with dozens of other women, squinting at the freshly pinned list. Across the top, in bold stencil, "Voluntary labor, 80 cents per day." No one spoke for a moment. The phrase made no sense. Voluntary, pay, a guard walked by chewing gum. You sign up, you work. Farm shifts start 0, 600, tokens at the end of the week. Then he was gone, leaving only questions swirling in his wake. Within hours, buses rumbled out through the wire gate. Ilse sat by the window, watching the endless horizon unfold, fields of sugar beets stretching beneath a blue sky. The air smelled of soil and gasoline. When the engine cut off, the guards handed out gloves, hats, and canvas sacks. "You work, you earn," one said, handing her a token the size of a coin. "Spend it at the PX." Out there, sweat replaced fear. Rows of POW, you bent to the earth, filling crates with beats, humming old tunes to pass the time. The work was real, hard, but fair. Reports later showed that over 6 million American farm laborers had left for war, and POW filled that gap. Each prisoner earned 80 cents a day, paid in camp currency that could buy soap, postcards, even chocolate. Ilse wiped her forehead, glancing at the horizon. Back home, people scavenged for bread. Here, she was paid by her enemy. "We were paid by the people we fought," one woman muttered, disbelief heavy in her tone. As the sun dropped, the air cooled and crickets filled the silence. Buses rolled back through the gate, wheels crunching gravel. The women stepped off, exhausted but lighter. Tokens jingled in their pockets like tiny proofs of dignity. In the mess hall that night, laughter bubbled quietly over plates of stew. Ilse studied the token in her hand, stamped with an eagle, words she could barely read. United States Army Exchange. For the first time, she didn't feel invisible. Captivity had become something stranger, a place where work brought worth. But curiosity returned as fast as fatigue. What could these tokens really buy? The answer waited behind a wooden counter stacked with shiny wrappers. The camp canteen. The canteen smelled like roasted coffee and floor polish. Ilse stepped in, tokens clutched in her fist, heart thudding with the strange thrill of choice. A glass counter gleamed under fluorescent light. Behind it, neat rows of Hershey bars, Lucky Strikes, soap, toothpaste, even postcards with American flags printed in color. She hesitated. Back home, sugar was rationed by the gram. Chocolate a rumor whispered in black markets. Here, the guard at the counter simply said, 5 cents each. His accent was thick with Texas drawl, his tone matter of fact. Ilse slid a token across. The wrapper crinkled in her hand, soft, unreal, precious. The first bite melted faster than she could taste it. Sweet, milky, almost too much after years of scarcity. She swallowed, eyes blurring for reasons she didn't understand. Around her, other women laughed like children rediscovering color. Rules are rules. The guard said with a shrug. "You earn it, you buy it. By 1945 standards, a single Hershey bar cost 5 U.S. cents, yet to the prisoners it might as well have been gold." Across American camps, reports mention POW buying nearly 2 million bars of chocolate and countless cigarettes during captivity, all paid for with the wages of their labor. For Ilse, the sweetness carried guilt. Berlin was still burning. Her mother's last letter had been full of ash and absence. Yet here she was, tasting luxury in an enemy camp. We ate American chocolate while Berlin burned. One nurse said quietly, unwrapping hers. The room went silent for a moment. Outside, the prairie wind hummed through the wire fence. A truck backfired in the distance, startling a few sparrows into flight. Ilse sat by the window, savoring the final piece slowly, letting the chocolate soften between her fingers. It wasn't just food. It was the flavor of contradiction, proof that kindness could sting more deeply than cruelty. She pocketed the wrapper, a strange souvenir of a war that had already ended for her, but not for the world. The guilt would grow heavier later that night, when the Red Cross truck rolled through the gate with letters stamped Germany. News from home was about to shatter the fragile sweetness. The mail truck rumbled through the gate like a ghost from another world. Dust rose, sunlight caught the Red Cross emblem, and a murmur swept across the yard, post from Germany. The women gathered instinctively, crowding near the wooden table where sacks of letters were unloaded. Each envelope carried more weight than any ration or paycheck. Ilse's hands trembled as her name was called. The envelope was thin, the handwriting shaky. Her mother's, she tore it open, heart pounding. The words blurred together: house gone, neighbors missing, your brother not heard from. By the third line, her breath caught. The paper smelled faintly of smoke. Berlin, she realized, wasn't a city anymore. It was dust and memory. All around her, the air thickened with whispers and sobs. Some letters were full of hope, babies born, cousins reunited. Others read like obituaries. One woman clutched her letter and whispered, "They had beds, my mother has rubble." The contrast hit harder than any gunfire ever had. Here, prisoners slept on clean mattresses, ate warm meals, earned wages. Their families, free but broken, scavenged through ruins. It was a moral whiplash no rulebook could explain. Each POW was allowed 2 letters a month, censored only for security, not emotion. Over 5 million messages passed between Axis prisoners and Europe, through the International Red Cross. For many, it was their only contact with life beyond the fence. That night, the camp fell unnaturally quiet. No laughter, no jazz, just the rustle of paper under dim lamps. Ilse reread her mother's words until they cut deeper with each pass. She wanted to cry, but the tears wouldn't come. The guilt was too dense, too raw. The next morning, she folded the letter carefully and placed it inside her satchel, beside the chocolate wrapper. 2 pieces of the same impossible puzzle, one sweet, one bitter. As she stepped outside, a faint smell of disinfectant drifted from the infirmary tent. A stretcher rolled past, carried by 2 American medics. One called out, "We'll patch her up quick." The sight made Ilse pause, compassion again where she least expected it. Drawn by curiosity, she followed the stretcher toward the tent, not knowing this next glimpse of humanity would change her even more deeply. Canvas flaps fluttered in the Kansas wind as Ilse stepped inside the camp infirmary. The air was thick with antiseptic and the faint hum of a generator. Beds lined both sides of the tent, some occupied by German prisoners, others by American guards recovering from training injuries. No separation, no hostility, just the steady rhythm of breathing and the occasional metallic clink of medical instruments. A medic, sandy-haired, sleeves rolled up, was cleaning a wound on a young German clerk's arm. "Hold still," he said softly, applying gauze with surgeon, level care. The woman winced. He offered a smile. "You're my patient now. Rules don't care what uniform you wore." Ilse stood frozen. Back home, hospitals were triage chaos, wounded soldiers ignored, civilians treated like burdens. Here, the enemy doctor treated them as equals. The infirmary rule, she later learned, was a direct Geneva mandate. Every POW was entitled to full medical care matching that of U.S. personnel. Records show the results. A 98% recovery rate among German POW in U.S. custody, an unheard of figure in wartime captivity. The Americans even supplied dental checkups and vaccinations. To Ilse, it was nothing short of surreal. As she helped change bed linens, she noticed the medic's careful movements, not mechanical, but human. He spoke casually about his mother in Ohio, his kid brother shipping out to the Pacific. No hatred, no lectures. Just life continuing on both sides of the wire. The German clerk looked up at Ilse, whispering, "Our officers left us bleeding in the sand. These people bring bandages." Ilse had no reply. Her world was flipping upside down, piece by piece, in the quietest ways possible. Later that day, the medic passed her a small vial of salve. "For your hands," he said. "Blisters from the field, yeah." She nodded, muttered thanks in English she barely remembered. The word felt foreign but right. When she stepped outside, sunlight flooded her face. Across the yard, laughter echoed again, not from the rec hall this time, but from a different corner of camp. Curious, she followed the sound and found a group of prisoners crouched near a concrete wall, brushes in hand, colors bleeding onto grey. Art, she realized, was their next form of survival. The smell of paint hit first, turpentine and dust blending under the prairie sun. Ilse stood still, watching a row of prisoners transform a concrete wall into something the war could never erase: color, life, and memory. A young POW, you crouched low, brushing careful strokes of green into the outline of a forest. Another added faint mist over distant trees. A deer appeared mid-step, head turned towards something unseen. None of them spoke much. The silence was its own kind of language, focused, reverent. Permission to paint had come from the camp commander himself. "Keeps them occupied," the guards said. But what they didn't see was how this act of creation was repairing something deeper. The same hands that once loaded rifles or typed orders now held brushes steady, sketching peace they couldn't name. Records from that year note over 30 zero artworks made by Axis prisoners in American camps, murals, portraits, wooden carvings, even miniature cathedrals built from scrap. Most were never destroyed. Many survive today in small town museums and church basements, silent testaments to a paradox: captivity birthing creativity. Ilse joined in cautiously, painting sky between branches. Each stroke loosened the knots in her chest. She thought of her brother, maybe gone, maybe alive, and how he'd once drawn on their kitchen wall as a boy. The memory slipped through her like light. Nearby, a guard leaned against the fence, watching the wall come alive. "You all got talent," he said with an awkward grin. "Better than Kansas Grey." One of the women laughed, a small, true sound. It startled them all. "We made beauty in a cage," whispered the Luftwaffe clerk beside Ilse. The words hung in the air like a confession. When the mural finally dried, the entire camp came to see it. Even the commander nodded once before walking away. For a brief moment, pride replaced fear. Ilse stared at the painted forest, realizing she'd forgotten the fences behind her. Then the low rumble of an engine cut through the calm. A truck, coated in desert sand and dust, rolled into the yard. Men with tan uniforms stepped off, lean, sunburned, newly captured. Their eyes scanned the camp, confused. The women stepped back. The North Africa prisoners had arrived. The truck doors slammed open, spilling out a wave of dust, sweat, and disbelief. The newcomers were tan-skinned, sand, burned and hollow-eyed soldiers taken from Rommel's Afrika Korps, captured thousands of miles from the Kansas plains. Their desert uniforms hung loose, still caked with fine yellow grit. They looked like ghosts of a different war entirely. The women stood watching as the men stumbled out, blinking into the Midwestern sunlight. A few murmured in confusion. "This is America," one asked, almost laughing. He expected punishment, interrogation, maybe chains. Instead, he saw painted murals, flower beds, and German women sitting on benches reading newspapers. The contrast stunned them. One officer, still clutching his field cap, muttered this. This is not defeat. This is humiliation wrapped in kindness. His tone carried both awe and bitterness. For soldiers raised on Nazi propaganda about decadent America, this place broke every illusion. Inside the mess hall, the men stared at food trays stacked with eggs and butter. The same meals the women now treated as normal. Prison, one whispered, half in disbelief. A sergeant answered dryly, by Geneva, yes. Historical records note that over 371 Axis troops were captured in North Africa, many shipped directly to the United States. Their arrival turned quiet camps into microcosms of a defeated army. Officers trying to preserve rank, civilians adjusting to absurd civility. That evening, Ilse overheard two of them near the fence. We lost not to soldiers, one said, but to factories. The other nodded. America wins with abundance. Those words stayed with her, echoing against the hum of generators powering the camp lights. As dusk settled, the air changed heavier, electric. The new prisoners carried not just sand in their boots, but stories of a different kind of defeat. Mechanical, logistical, unstoppable. They'd seen Allied supply lines that stretched like arteries across oceans. Ilse watched them settle into barracks, their confusion slowly replaced by reluctant awe. In their disbelief, she recognized her own first days, the same shock, the same crumbling certainty. The next morning, as diesel trucks rolled in delivering more rations, Ilse would see the truth for herself. Abundance wasn't rumor. It was America's quiet weapon, and it was everywhere, humming, shining, engines rumbled from dawn till dusk. Ilse watched as convoys of supply trucks rolled through the camp's service road, stacked high with crates of food, uniforms, fuel cans, even ice for the mess hall. Every morning it happened like clockwork, a mechanical ballet of plenty. The rhythm was almost mocking. The desert soldiers stood behind the fence, stunned. They bring milk in bottles, for prisoners. One muttered, disbelief etched on his face. Another pointed toward the generator's shed, where thick cables snaked into every barrack. Electricity, hot water, for us. Inside the camp laundry, machines thumped endlessly, steam hissing through pipes. Ilse watched a guard adjust a valve. Everything's powered, he said casually. Everything's replaced. That sentence hit her harder than any weapon ever could. This was the other front of the war, not bullets or tanks, but supply chains. The United States had built an empire of logistics that dwarfed the imagination. Reports show that by 1945, America produced nearly 50% of the world's industrial goods. More steel than Germany, Japan, and Italy combined. For every tank the Axis built, the Allies built 7. For every truck destroyed, 10 replaced it by next week. The German officers in the camp began to whisper the same conclusion. We were never fighting their soldiers. We were fighting their factories. Ilse felt that truth everywhere in the endless food, the fresh linens, the light bulbs that never flickered. One night she stood near the fence as a convoy passed, headlights slicing through the dark. Inside the trucks, she glimpsed sacks labeled for POW rations. It was absurd. The enemy fed its captives better than Germany fed its citizens. Nearby, an Afrika Korps lieutenant murmured, "We fought ideology. They fought with refrigerators." The phrase lodged in her mind like a splinter. Later, in her bunk, the steady hum of the generator lulled her to sleep. The sound was comfort and contradiction, proof that power itself had shape, tone, and rhythm. It was civilization rendered mechanical. But that same hum carried something else too, faint, melodic, coming from the recreation hall, a tune drifting into the night. Soft, familiar, almost haunting. Ilse turned her head, recognizing it instantly. It was Lily Marlene, and someone, an American voice, was humming along. The night was still except for the low hum of the generator and the soft wind whispering through the barbed wire. Ilse lay awake, eyes tracing the shadows on the ceiling, when a sound drifted across the camp, faint, fragile, impossible. A melody carried on the air, trembling like memory itself. Lily Marlene, she sat up. The song, that bittersweet wartime anthem of longing and loss, was unmistakable. Every German soldier knew it. It had been their heartbeat across fronts, their lullaby in bomb shelters and trenches. Yet here it was, in Kansas, sung by the enemy. Ilse slipped quietly from her bunk and stepped outside. The night was cool, the sky stretched wide and silver with stars. Near the recreation hall, a group of women had gathered, their faces half lit by the yellow glow from inside. Someone had smuggled in a record. The gramophone needle scratched, then steadied underneath the lantern by the barrack gates. But then came something stranger. An American guard, leaning on his rifle, began humming along softly, almost respectfully. He didn't understand the words, but he knew the feeling. For a few moments, the wire between captor and captive dissolved in the sound of shared loneliness. Reports from POW camps confirm it. Lily Marlene was one of the few songs broadcast by both Allied and Axis stations during the war. It became a strange bridge, a melody that neither side could claim, yet both needed. Ilse watched the guard's face in the flickering light. No contempt, no pride, just humanity, stripped bare. The refrain echoed through the stillness when we said goodbye beside the barrack gates. The same line that once made soldiers cry on both sides of the front, now wrapped around her like a confession. Tears finally came, slow and silent. For the first time, she didn't feel German or prisoner. She just felt human, tired, small, and deeply aware that grief had no nationality. As the song faded, the guard straightened and nodded once toward the women. No words, just respect. Ilse wiped her eyes, heart aching but lighter. The next morning, rumors spread like wind through the barracks, talk of trains being readied, of camps closing, of repatriation. The war had ended long ago. Now, freedom was on its way, but it wouldn't feel the way anyone imagined. Summer 1946 baked the Kansas plains in white heat. The war was over, the newsreels had stopped rolling, and the camp felt half empty, as if the fences themselves were waiting for orders. Then one morning it came, the sound of train whistles from beyond the horizon. The gates creaked open for the last time. Repatriation begins today. An officer announced, his voice flat but final. The words rippled through the camp like electricity. Women hurried to pack their few belongings, a satchel, a book, a photograph, a letter yellowed from too much reading. Ilse folded her uniform neatly, smoothing every crease before setting it aside. She wore civilian clothes now, donated by the Red Cross. For the first time in years, no insignia marked her chest. Outside, the sun hit hard. Rows of prisoners formed under the guard towers, the air shimmering with heat. American MP checked names off clipboards, collected armbands, and handed out travel papers stamped returnee. Some women cried openly. Others smiled dazed. A sergeant passed Ilse her document. Home her, he said half. Grinning, she nodded. If it still exists. Most German POW were repatriated between 1946 and 1947. Nearly 425 zero men and women shipped back across the Atlantic. The process was efficient, almost sterile, but beneath the order lay emotion too deep for rules. Many prisoners dreaded their return. The homeland they remembered was rubble and silence. Ilse boarded the train slowly, glancing once more at the mural wall. The painted forest fading in the sun. Behind it, an American flag fluttered in the breeze. She felt no bitterness, only a strange gratitude that tasted like survival. We entered as Nazis. One woman whispered beside her, "We leave as humans." Ilse said nothing, but the words settled in her bones. The engine roared, steam hissed. The train jerked forward, metal clattering against metal. Through the dusty window, she saw guards saluting casually. No cheers, no farewells, just quiet acknowledgement. The landscape rolled by, vast and indifferent, swallowing the camp piece by piece. As the horizon widened, Ilse pressed her palm to the glass. The fences were gone now, but part of her remained behind those wires, the part that learned kindness could be stronger than ideology. She didn't know it yet, but her story wasn't ending. It was only shifting from captivity to reflection. Years later, Ilse Brandt sat by a window in her small apartment near Hamburg, the rain tracing lines down the glass like memories she couldn't forget. The war was long over, but its echoes still clung to her in dreams, in sounds, in the simple act of folding bread the way they did in Kansas. On the table lay a thin notebook, its pages covered in careful handwriting, the title, written in pencil, The Shock of Kindness. She wrote about everything: the library that allowed banned books, the jazz that replaced orders with laughter, the taste of a chocolate bar while Berlin smoldered. But more than anything, she wrote about the moment the enemy stopped being faceless. Freedom, she penned, began the day I was captured. Post-war surveys later confirmed what her memoir echoed. Over 80% of repatriated German POW from U.S. camps described their treatment as fair or humane. Many said it changed their view of America forever. Historians call it the silent diplomacy of decency, a policy that turned compassion into quiet propaganda more powerful than any speech. Ilse's words captured that paradox perfectly. They defeated us with factories, she wrote, but conquered us with mercy. She never glorified the past, she dissected it, sentence by sentence, as if trying to understand how brutality could coexist with grace. In 1955, when Germany rejoined the community of nations, Ilse attended a small exhibit in Berlin displaying POW artwork from U.S. camps. There it was, the mural of the forest she had painted a decade earlier, still preserved on a slab of concrete. Faded, cracked, but unmistakable. She stood in front of it for a long time. Around her, visitors murmured, moved by the absurd beauty of something created in captivity. Ilse smiled faintly, remembering the brush, the laughter, the Kansas wind through barbed wire. For a moment, she was 20, for again, standing in sunlight, realizing the world wasn't as simple as uniforms and borders. As the museum lights dimmed, she closed her notebook and whispered to herself, "Mercy is the hardest kind of victory." Then she walked away, disappearing into the drizzle outside, one life among millions shaped not by war's cruelty, but by its unexpected humanity. And somewhere in a forgotten archive, her story still whispers through yellowed pages, a reminder that even behind wire, hearts can learn to surrender